Good morning. Welcome to Relocalizing Vermont here on listener-supported Central Vermont Community Radio. We're going to start out with Phoebe Potts. She will be at the Lost Nation Theater for a production, just a one-week-only production of April 9th through 13th called Too Fat for China. It's a hilarious live performance, and we have with us on the line Phoebe Potts. Phoebe, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And you are coming to us live from
Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Gloucester, Mass. Okay, so Too Fat for China. You're a professional Jew. You've made as you call yourself, you have made a show called Too Fat for China. What's it all about? Where'd that title come from?
Too Fat for China is a solo piece of theater. It also has a large cranky in it. I know a lot of Vermonters know what a cranky is. It's not just my temperament, but a large scroll of my comics that go with the piece. Too Fat for China came from the fact that I was quite literally too fat to adopt from China. My husband and I were looking to adopt a baby, and at the time, international adoption was a big going concern, and China had a weight limit on who could adopt. And in America, we don't generally tell other people that they're fat. So it was actually kind of a breath of fresh air that somebody finally said it. I had been asking my friends, I think I'm fat. Did I get fat? And they would just start barking at me like, no, you're beautiful. And it was very refreshing and eye-opening to have an entire nation of over 1 billion people claim that I was in fact fat.
Did you get any insights in this experience to what Chinese husbands do when their wife asks them, does this dress make me look fat?
I didn't. The interesting thing is I didn't delve very deep into China because I had always known that I wanted to adopt from Ethiopia, and that's eventually what we did after a very bumpy road and a terrible domestic adoption that went wrong. But what China did do for me is open up a lot of questions about what does it take to be somebody's mother? Like, what are the requirements? What makes you eligible? Since in the adoption business, there were clearly rules and regulations. And the story goes on with more questions about why I started asking myself, why was I in a position to adopt, and why were women put in a position where they had to place their children for adoption? And what I found out is that it doesn't take a village, it takes a mortgage to adopt a child. And that's the only difference between me and women who had to place their children for adoption. Yes, so that's, and then I further discovered that mortgages come from slave ships. So that all of the money that I have, the inherited wealth, is coming from my father and my husband's father, who got the GI Bill immediately after the Second World War. And where did that money come from? And I trace it back to the transatlantic slave trade, which I know sounds really funny, but I swear the show is really, really funny.
And you were successful ultimately in your adoption?
Yes. So I don't. I don't leave people in a terrible way at the end of the show. Okay. After all that pathos, there is a beautiful baby boy at the end of it.
Okay.
And he is our son, and we hit the jackpot with this kid.
Well, it's also all that history and tracing it back to slave ships and so on. That's not only hilarious. It sounds like it. It's also a lot of weight to put on your son's shoulders.
I love that you recognize that. So here, I was thinking that same thing when we adopted him. I was like, he's going to be Ethiopian in America, he's going to be Black in New England, and he's going to be Jewish in Gloucester. And that's a lot of identity stuff to put on those tiny little shoulders.
Yeah.
He wears it very well. And the thing, and I feel like after getting to know your radio station a little bit, that people I think will appreciate is that what I found, the saving, the connective tissue of all of this is stories. So the stories that I tell him, that I've told him since I was a baby, that I tell the audience is we are all Ethiopian. We all come from the Rift Valley. We are all descendants of Lucy, the primate who stood up. I find a connection through King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Queen Sheba was the queen of Ethiopia, what was now Ethiopia. She converted to Judaism in order to have her baby, who became emperor, and every emperor after claims to be a descendant of Sheba and Solomon. And also the Moses story. The Nile River starts in Ethiopia and winds its way north to Egypt. And Moses is the Cadillac of adoption stories. So it's those stories that bind my family, but also sort of connect all of us.
I like the idea of a basket floating down the Nile and in the reeds being a Cadillac.
Right, fully loaded. That's a good comic. I want to draw that now.
And I like the thought that we're all Ethiopians through and all related to Lucy. I'm trying to remember who the 19th century person was who said this, but I'll say it's Mark Twain, because all 19th century quotes come from Mark Twain, right? Someone asked him, "Are you related to X person?" And he said, "Yeah, I think we're distant relatives through Adam." But
nice, right. That's correct.
The modern interpretation is we're distant relatives through Lucy. Everybody.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. We all walked out of that Rift Valley. Mm-hmm. So,
for those just tuning in, we're talking with Phoebe Potts. She wrote, directs, stars in. Do you direct the show as well?
No, Christopher Griffith directed it.
Okay.
And he's fantastic.
Okay.
But I wrote it, I perform in it, and I painted it. I drew all the comics.
Right, the cranky comics for this show, Too Fat for China, which is opening April 9th next week at the Lost Nation Theater.
The show does own up to the terrible things that I did for love, meaning I was complicit in a business to get my baby. But the voices of adult adoptees are so instructive for adoptive parents and for other adoptees. What this is like to essentially been ripped from your homeland, which I'm not laughing at that. I just laughed at, like, when he came home as a baby, I was like, when is he going to get mad at me? When is he going to get mad at me for ripping him from his homeland?
Uh-huh.
And converting him to Judaism and making him be this other person. I have to say he handles it with great grace. But it's not just I think the way it was presented to me as an adoptive parent when we first started the process is that somehow I was some sort of savior and this is a beautiful thing. And I want to show the sort of warts and all of the rapacious business of it.
Right.
And that stories and love save the day.
And how do you make humor out of rapacious business and all this other heavy stuff that you've mentioned, slave ships?
The pictures definitely help. I would say that, for instance, one of the adoption agents I paint as a person with, instead of a head, they have a giant Coach purse as a head. Actually, it's a pretty old practice for Jews and for Ethiopians to find humor in suffering. I know that's not specific to these groups, but these groups have been very, very good at it. Ethiopian culture has a ton of sarcasm and humor around suffering, and certainly Jews are known for complaining loudly, but telling very good stories as they do.
You're talking about an international adoption, and not only a cross-racial adoption, but an international adoption. When your son grows up, if he wants to find out more about his biological parents, what possibilities will be open to him?
Well, I've already tried just to have it ready for him so that the trail doesn't go cold. It definitely varies case by case. It's very difficult to find the biological families when children have been abandoned. With the time of our adoption, it was illegal in Ethiopia to adopt, meaning if you were Ethiopian, you could not adopt another Ethiopian. However, international businesses could do it. To do adoption. I know you're making a great face. It's very confounding. And since that time, there's an amazing agency that is taking in information from biological parents in Ethiopia and creating a database so that adoptive parents like myself can keep an eye on it and see if we have a match. I've been saving money for years so that we can return together and find some connection to the people and the land. We definitely have Ethiopian connections here. It's an incredible country. It's an incredible culture. It's incredibly diverse. So I'm very happy that we have it in our lives. I hope that we can find some form of connection for him to his original family. Yeah.
Well, let's learn a little bit more about you and your background, Phoebe. I understand that you have not been treading the boards all your life.
No. Well, like I said, I've been a professional Jew, which means I've been a teacher to pay the bills while I've been an artist and a performer. I have been the head of what you would call a Hebrew school. Although we don't call it that anymore because we find that it turns people into anti-Semites because they don't like Hebrew school. Because who wants to go to school for another day? So I called it a family learning project. And I wrote and drew a book called Good Eggs about infertility and Judaism and finding my voice as an artist. And HarperCollins published it. And they gave me this tidy check. And I thought, oh, I'm set for life. And I'm going to buy everybody a house. And then they printed 20,000 copies and it sank like a stone. I sold 5,000 copies by myself, and the rest, I think they just bulldozed into a pit somewhere. But I then drew and wrote the sequel, Too Fat for China, and I couldn't sell it. And so I thought, oh, I get it. They just want it in color. So I went back and I drew it in color. And I resubmitted, and they're like, "No, you're not well known enough. We're not going to take another chance on you." And I started telling stories about myself because I'm my favorite subject. Here at our local, it's like a moth. It's called Fish Tales, and I was anointed the storyteller in residence. And at the end of the year, they said, "Do you want a night just for your stories?" Because we had several storytellers a night, and I said, "I do, but I want it in a year's time, and I have one story." And I took that year to write Too Fat for China, and turn it into the piece that it is now. And I'm very, very pleased to say and grateful that it had legs. And a friend and I built the Cranky. I went to the Edinburgh Fringe. I got very good reviews, including from the tight-lipped Scotsman who called it amusing, which I hear is super high praise. And it's gone on to win Best Storytelling Show at the United Solo Show Festival in New York City, and I've done it in Chicago and DC. And I'm so excited to be on tour with it and be coming to Montpelier next week.
What is it that you found so far that really resonates with people about this story?
I think because I'm very honest about my role in this story, and I think because I know I keep saying it's funny, which is the worst thing a comedian can say. I swear I'm funny, but I swear that it's funny. And I think the funny puts the sort of broccoli in the brownie mix, that you can handle these very big, honest issues honestly if it's not pedantic, but rather instructive and funny. It's also, who doesn't love a quest story? Like, a person goes out on a quest for something, has, terrible things happen, things go sideways, and yet at the end, despite all the major strange ethical questions you've had to face, you end up as a little unit, a little tight triangle of love. It's kind of I find that people find that redemptive and do not have to be adoptive parents to connect to it.
I forgot to issue a spoiler alert at the beginning of this interview.
Oh. That's right. They'll forget. It can be harrowing, and they'll forget, and then they'll remember, and then they'll be like, oh. They'll laugh again with remembering.
Well, they'll know it's a comedy and not a tragedy, and they'll know that you and your husband are already married, so it's not going to be everybody getting married at the end, and so something else good might happen.
That's true.
Right.
God, how many movies did we grow up with and TV shows where everybody got married at the end?
Yeah. Well, Shakespeare plays too.
Right. Talk about indoctrination.
Yep.
Oh, speaking of which, you and I have Romeo and Juliet in common.
We do. You have recently played the nurse.
Yes.
And
we did it at Hammond Castle, Lane's Coven Theater Company. It's wild. And then it's relevant at the end of the play, the prince gives this speech where basically saying your mismanagement has led to the death of children. And I feel that is so apropos of any era, but certainly the era we're in, that it's not necessary to put all these children's lives in danger, and that's what we do. Which I'm not saying that as a scold, I'm saying it means that theater's very relevant to understanding. It's very hard to understand what's happening now because so much of it is coming through this giant fire hose at us all the time with the internet. And theater has a way of like crystallizing these issues for us, so we can take time to reflect and think about them.
Right.
The theater especially just feels very, very important, a very important place for us to connect right now.
And your play is Too Fat for China. It's about adopting, not from China, but from Ethiopia. And how old is your son now, Phoebe?
He's 14.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a giant. Yeah.
And the story that you're telling about the process, is that changing as you tell it for different audiences?
What I do find is where the audience reacts can be different, and that really is the juice that makes it all come together. It doesn't work if I do it in a broom closet. It really works if the audience is there with me.
Very good. Well, Phoebe Potts will be opening for 1 week only her production of Too Fat for China at the Lost Nation Theater. That starts next week, April 9th. And she wrote it. She drew the cranky drawing. She cranks a cranky, and she's starring in it. Phoebe Potts, thank you so much for taking the time to assemble all these thoughts on adoption and telling your story in a funny way, and for bringing it to us in Central Vermont and telling us about it today.
And thank you for a marvelous interview, and support Lost Nation Theater. God, they do good stuff.
They do, absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I'm Carl Etnier. This is Relocalizing Vermont.